Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Ayin Tet, Machar Ashpa, Machar Zibla. Back in the Mishnah, we learned that if I sell you an ashpa, a dunghill, a place where one puts the manure, then you get the manure also. Congratulations. And if I sell you a cistern, then obviously you get the cistern itself, you own it, and you also own the water that's in the cistern. And that's a general rule for a dovecote and other things. If I sell you the container item and it has that thing in it, then you also get the contents along with the sale. Now, the Gemara is going to compare a sale to hekdesh. If I make something hekdesh, let's say I make a cistern hekdesh, then is the water also going to be hekdesh? More specifically, if I use the cistern for myself, for my own purposes, well, I commit me'ilah if I made it hekdesh. What about the water that's in it? And the Gemara will make a more fine distinction between water that is in it at the time of it that make it hekdesh, and water that comes into it in the future. So the Gemara was only going to come back to our Mishnah at the end of this stuff, and it's going to bring in our Mishnah. But we have to build up till we get there. Just a note that when the Gemara brings in the Mishnah, it's actually going to quote a version that's the opposite of an opinion that's the opposite. That says if I sell you a cistern, it does not include the water. All right, we'll see all that coming up. Tanan hatam. Kol ha'ra'ui lemizbeach velo lebedek habayit. Lebedek habayit velo lemizbeach. Lo lemizbeach velo lebedek habayit. Mo'alin bahen ubema shebetochan. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Me'ilah that says anything that's fit to put on the mizbeach, but not for the upkeep of the Bet HaMikdash. The Mishnah is going to mention 3 different levels of usage that the Bet HaMikdash can take when you make something hekdesh. The highest level is if I make hekdesh, let's say a lamb, right, an animal that can be offered on the mizbeach, and that would include also oil or wine, things that are put on the mizbeach. If I make that lamb hekdesh, then it has to be used for a korban, as long as it doesn't have a blemish. So that's top level. Mid level is something that's used for bedek habayit, so like building materials that the Bet HaMikdash can use. They have wood, they need to use it for the upkeep of the Bet HaMikdash. That's mid-level bedek habayit. And the lowest level, if it can't be used by the Bet HaMikdash at all, like if I donate food or something, in that case, the Bet HaMikdash will just sell it and take its value in money and use that money for whatever they need for the upkeep of the Bet HaMikdash. In all these cases, if I make something hekdesh, then I commit me'ilah if I use it. So that's the 3 levels. Anything that can be used on the altar, but not for the upkeep, not for upkeep. Or if it can be used for upkeep, but not for the altar. Or if it can be used neither for the altar nor for the upkeep of the Bet HaMikdash. Any of these things, even the lowest level, once I have some fruit here, I make it hekdesh, then I eat it, I use it for myself, then I commit me'ilah, a very serious sin, not only for the item itself, but also for its contents. If I make hekdesh, some container, then the contents also would become hekdesh, and I commit me'ilah if I use the contents. So if I have a bottle of apple juice and I make it hekdesh while the apple juice is in it, then I drink the apple juice, I commit me'ilah. That's the beginning. Now we're going to give some examples. Kesad. הקדיש בור מלאה מים, אשפות מלאות זבל, שובח מלא יונים, שדה מלאה עשבים, אילן נשוי פירות, מועלין בהן ובמה שבתוכן. If I consecrate a cistern, and it's right now filled with water when I make it consecrated, or a dunghill that's filled with manure, or a dovecote that's filled with doves, or a field that's filled with plants or trees that are currently bearing fruit. There's fruit on the trees right now. And if I either use the tree or the fruit, if I use the cistern itself or the water that's in it, either way, I will have committed me'ilah. אבל הקדיש בור ואחר כך נתמלא מים, אשפה ואחר כך נתמלאה זבל, שובח ואחר כך נתמלא יונים, אילן ואחר כך נשא פירות, שדה ואחר כך נתמלאה עשבים, מועלין בהן ואין מועלין במה שבתוכן דברי רבי יהודה. However, if right now I make a cistern, an empty cistern, hekdesh, and then it gets filled with water afterwards. In that case, I do not commit me'ilah. We're not talking about whether it's hekdesh or not. It could be that once it goes into the cistern, it may become hekdesh, but because it was not in there at the time that I made a hekdesh, it's a lower level in terms of the punishment. I don't get me'ilah for that. And the same is true if someone consecrates a dung hill, that's the spot where the dung goes, but right now there's no dung on it, and then it gets filled, and someone commits me'ilah, uses it, they do not commit me'ilah. Or they make hekdesh a shovach, and afterwards doves come in, it was empty at first. Or a tree that has no fruit on it now, and afterwards the fruit grows. Or a field that right now is empty, and then it grows grass. And someone uses that stuff. So me'ilah is committed if they use the item itself that they made hekdesh, but they do not commit me'ilah if they get personal benefit from the contents of it, because the contents come in later. All that is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda makes no distinction between a cistern and a tree. All right, even though a cistern, water comes in from elsewhere, and a tree is actually growing from the tree, he makes no distinction. However, Rabbi Yosef Omer, Hikdish et hasadeh ve'et ha'ilan mo'alin behen ubegidulehem mipnei shehen gidulei hekdesh. Rabbi Yehuda seems he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda regarding the inanimate, non-alive things like the dovecote and the cistern and the dunghill. These containers are empty; they don't do anything. And then a new thing came in from elsewhere, so that that contents, one does not commit me'ilah. He agrees. However, for naturally growing containers or items, like the field and the tree, so there, even though right now there's no apples on the tree, I made the tree hekdesh. The apples come, and I take an apple and eat it, I do violate me'ilah because it grew from it, and that's the general rule. There's something that I make hekdesh, it and the future things that grow from it, they're really part of it. They're kind of there in potential. The seed is there, the bud is there, it's going to grow. And so anything that grows from it, and same thing with the field, even though now it's empty, but then the field grows some herbs, then I commit me'ilah for that also. And so it seems that Rabbi Yehuda would disagree, and he says, no, it makes no difference what the item is. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees only regarding a field and trees. Tanya, Amar Rabbi, Nir'in divrei Rabbi Yehuda bebor v'shobach, v'divrei Rabbi Yosef b'sadeh v'ilan. Now we have a baraita that is connected to the Mishnah, and this is Rabbi, meaning Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Do not be confused with Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, who was in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai is a fourth generation Tana, a student of Rabbi Akiba. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is a fifth generation Tana. So we'll just call him Rabbi as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda to distinguish. Now this baraita is commenting on our Mishnah. We're going to have a question. We're going to interpret it, and in the end we're going to come back to the same exact place as we are in our understanding of the Mishnah. So don't get confused by this following tangent. So Rabbi says, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to a cistern and a dovecote. And it seems to me that I agree with Rabbi Yosef when it comes to a field and a tree. So we want to understand, what does he mean by this? Hai mai. Bishlama nir'in divrei Rabbi Yehuda bebor v'shobach, mikela de palig asadeh ve'ilan. I understand when he says that he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to a cistern and a dovecote. That implies that there is a disagreement, that is that Rabbi Yosef disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to the other items, a field and a tree. And that's true. So it makes sense to say, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda regarding bor and shovach. And he's going to disagree regarding the other items, and so Rabbi Yosef, in fact, disagrees on those items. So we can make sense of that half of the sentence. Ela nir'in divrei Rabbi Yosef besadeh ve'ilan, miklal de palig bebor v'shobach, v'Rabbi Yosef sadeh ve'ilan kamar. But when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, I agree with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef when it comes to a field and a tree, so that implies that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rabbi Yosef when it comes to a bor and a shovach. But that isn't true because, right, we just saw Rabbi Yosef is only addresses the case of a field of a tree. Rabbi Yosef, as the way we read it is that Rabbi Yosef says, listen, I disagree regarding a field and a tree. But he didn't say anything about the bor and shovach, so it sounds like he is in total agreement with bor and shovach. A short way of asking this question is, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi could have simply said, I agree with Rabbi Yosef. He's consistent, totally consistent. I agree with Rabbi Yosef across the board, right? So this is a very strange way to say, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to bor and shovach, and Rabbi Yosef when it comes to the tree in the field. Why say it that way? After all, Rabbi Yosef does not disagree with in the cistern and the dovecote at all. So let's try to answer this. Maybe you'll say that Rabbi Yosef in the Mishnah is actually not giving his own opinion, but only saying, according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef himself thinks that anytime, even for a cistern, the water that comes in afterwards, one will also commit me'ilah. Rabbi Yosef thinks that even though it's just a container and I made a hekdesh the container, things that come in afterwards also will become hekdesh. How does that work? Come on, in a few minutes we'll talk about that you can have in mind, things that happen in the future, even though they don't exist right now. Okay, but Rabbi Yosef himself thinks that, he disagrees in all cases. When he talks here in this Mishnah, here he's just saying, listen, even according to you, that you say a cistern that's empty now, and the water comes in later, will not be me'ilah. Okay, I can agree with that. But even you should admit that when it comes to a tree that's growing, the growth is from the tree. It's not from an external source. It's growing from the tree itself. The tree is just getting bigger. And so therefore even you should agree that one should commit me'ilah if one eats from the future fruit of the tree. But Rabbi Yosef himself actually thinks that there is me'ilah in all cases. And therefore, when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was making his statement, he was making reference to Rabbi Yosef himself, his own opinion. And so that's why he said, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to bor and shovach. And Rabbi Yosef disagrees with even those cases. And I agree with Rabbi Yosef when it comes to Sedeh and Ilan. And Rabbi Yehuda will disagree in those cases. And so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's statement makes sense if we follow that assumption. The problem is that assumption goes against a different baraita. Vatanya Amar Rabbi Yosef En ani ro'eh devarav shel Rabbi Yehuda b'sadeh ve'ilan mipnei shehen gidulei hekdesh b'sadeh ve'ilan hu deno ro'eh habebor v'shobach ro'eh. In this baraita, Rabbi Yosef himself says, I do not agree with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to a field and a tree because they're growing from something hekdesh, and anything that grows from hekdesh is itself hekdesh. We see from this language that he only disagrees regarding a field and a tree, but in a cistern and a dovecote, he agrees. And therefore, we cannot say that Rabbi Yosef is only speaking lidvarav according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but rather Rabbi Yosef himself is in total agreement when it comes to the bor, the cistern, and the dovecote. And so we're back to our question. It doesn't make sense for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi to say, I agree with Rabbi Yosef in Sedeh and Ilan, and you don't agree with Rabbi Yosef when it comes to the bor and the dovecote, but you do agree with him. You just say, I agree with Rabbi Yosef on all matters. So we have to readjust. Hachi ka'amar. Nir'in dibrei Rabbi Yehuda le Rabbi Yosef bebor v'shobach. Shaf Rabbi Yosef lo nechelak alav ela b'sedeh v'ilan. Aval bebor v'shobach modi leh. So now we understand. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was not actually giving his own opinion. I agree with this opinion. I agree with that opinion. No, Rabbi Yosef was actually only explaining the Mishnah and explaining that the words of Rabbi Yehuda make sense according to Rabbi Yosef when it comes to a cistern and dovecote. Rabbi Yosef agrees with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to a cistern and dovecote. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is telling us precisely not to think that he's speaking lidvarav. He's giving us the information that we figured out from this baraita. that Rabbi Yosef agrees with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to the inanimate things. She'af Rabbi Yosef lo nechelak alav ela besadeh ve'ilan aval bar v'shobach modi leh, because Rabbi Yosef only disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to a field and a tree that are alive and grow on their own. However, when it comes to a cistern and a dovecote, Rabbi Yosef agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, now we're back to square one. We figured out what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi meant, and we have a simple machloket between Rabbi Yehuda that says across the board, all things, if the content comes in later or grows later, there's no me'ilah. Whereas Rabbi Yosef says, if it's something that grows, then there is me'ilah. Now we're going to bring another baraita. Tenor banan. Hikdishan rekanin v'achar kach nitmaleu. Mo'alin behen ve'en mo'alin bema shebetochan. Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbi Shimon omer, af mo'alin bema shebetochan. So there's another braita with a Tanakama and between a machlok between Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbi Shimon. So we're going to try to relate this braita to the one that to the Mishnah that we had before. This braita teaches if someone made something hekdesh while it's empty. We're going to discuss what is he making hekdesh. Is it talking about a cistern or talking about a tree that has no fruit? That's going to be machloket Rabbah and Abaye. So he makes something hekdesh while it's empty, and then it gets filled up. And then he uses one of those items. So there is me'ilah for the item itself, the container, but not for the contents. That's the opinion of Tanakama. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, disagrees and says that you even commit me'ilah for what's inside. So Tanakama here seems that he would agree with Rabbi Yehuda that it's only the container and not the contents, and he doesn't make any distinction between what it is across the board. Rabbi Elazar, however, seems to take an opposite extreme, that everything that's in it, even though it came in later, still one commits me'ilah, and he seems to say that about everything across the board, right? They don't say, is this only about a cistern, is this about a field? So we have to explain what this is. Amar Rabba, machloket besadeh ve'ilan, de Tanakama sabar la ki Rabbi Yehuda, ve'Rabbi Elazar b'Rabbi Shimon sabar la ki Rabbi Yosef. Aval bebor v'shobach dibra kol mo'alin bahen ve'en mo'alin b'ma shebetochan. Rabbi explains that this machloket in this baraita is only regarding something that grows on a field and a tree. Tanakama is exactly the same as Rabbi Yehuda, that the future fruits, if you eat the fruit, no me'ilah. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, follows the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, who says that in a tree and a field, something that grows after, it's part of the growth of something hekdesh, and you do commit me'ilah. So they're arguing along the same lines as those other Tanaim. However, if it's a cistern and a dovecote, inanimate objects, not alive, then everybody here would agree that there is no me'ilah, not for the item itself, that there is me'ilah for the item itself, but not for the contents inside, which is agreed upon by both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosef. So according to Rabbah, there's nothing special about this braita. We're just adding another opinion, another named opinion, Rabbi Elazar, who agrees with Rabbi Yosef, and that Tanakama agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. But there's no new view recorded here. Amar le Abaye, be'ela hadetanya, hekdishan melein, mo'alin bahen ubema shebetochan, ve'Rabbi Elazar b'Rabbi Shimon mahalif. Abaye says, look at the continuation of that very baraita, and it gives a case here where he made it hekdesh while it was full. And so you said that this is talking about a tree. Okay, so that means if the tree has fruit on it and he makes it hekdesh, according to Tanakama, one commits me'ilah not only on the tree but also on the fruit. That makes sense, Tanakama, because now it has fruit on it. But here's the big surprise. According to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, he says he reverses it. He says that the law here will be the opposite of what it was up above. In other words, when the tree is empty at the time of Hekdesh, and he derives benefit from it, then he commits me'ilah for the tree and the fruit also, even though it was empty. But paradoxically, if he makes the tree hekdesh while the fruit is on it, and eats from the fruit, then he does not commit me'ilah. And really, this does not make any sense. So that's his question. If we're talking about a field and a tree, then why would Rabbi Elazar switch around his opinion? It should be that if it's talking about a tree, and he thinks that when it's empty and it grows afterwards, you commit me'ilah because it's a growth. Then all the more so, if it's currently on it when I make it ekdesh, all the more so it should commit me'ilah. So therefore, this baraita cannot make sense with the assumption of Rabbah that's talking about a field and a tree. אלא אמר רבא מחלוקת בבור ושובח, אבל בשדה ואילן דברי הכל מעלין בהן ובמה שבתוכן. Rather, Rabbah says the machloket in this baraita between Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar is actually talking about a cistern and a dovecote. But that we're going to have to explain that. But if it was a tree or a field, then everybody would agree that if it's full at the time of Ekdesh, then you commit me'ilah not only for the tree itself, but also for the fruit. Okay, so now we resolve the tree part of it. According to Rabbi Elazar, doesn't matter whether it's empty or full. If anything that grows afterwards, whether it grows afterwards or it's already there, you're going to commit me'ilah. So there's no paradox in that part of it. However, now we have to explain. Okay, so now, according to you, Abaye, what is the foundation of their machloket when it's empty at the time of Ekdesh? And explain to us the reasons for their machloket when it's full at the time of Ekdesh. Okay, we'll do one by one. Berekanin pelige beplukta de Rabbi Meir ve'Rabanan. Detana kama sabar la kerabanan. Damri en adam makne davar shelo ba la'olam. Ve'Rabbi Elazar ve'Rabbi Shimon sabar ke'Rabbi Meir. Damar adam makne davar shelo ba la'olam. When it's empty at the time of Ekdesh and there's no water in the cistern. We're talking about a cistern case. So there Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar are arguing along the same lines as Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan, who argue about whether one can transfer ownership of something that doesn't yet exist in the world. And the same thing, can one make hekdesh, something that doesn't yet exist in the world. So Tanakama follows the opinion of Rabbanan against Rabbi Meir, who says that you cannot transfer ownership of something that doesn't exist in the world. And right now, the water does not exist. I mean, it exists somewhere in the world, or maybe not. And maybe it's up in the sky, it just didn't rain yet, or wherever it is. Point is, it's not in the cistern. So, can I make hekdesh something that's not currently in the cistern? I made the cistern hekdesh. It's empty. So you can't make something hekdesh that only comes into the cistern later. We're only talking about hekdesh, that it's hekdesh because it's part of the cistern. But it's not part of the cistern now. So therefore, you cannot make it hekdesh, and that's why one commits me'ilah only for the container and not for the contents. Whereas Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, he agrees with Rabbi Meir, who says that one can acquire something that does not yet exist in the world. And therefore here also, even though right now the water is not in it, but the water is going to come in it, right? You can be sure at some point it's going to rain, or this river will come and it's going to fill up the cistern, and therefore it's considered as if it's part of it now. We consider it, potentially full, and therefore one does commit me'ilah not only for the cistern, but even for the water that will come into it in the future. Now we ask about that. Can you really apply to Rabbi Meir to this case? Emor de shamat le Rabbi Meir kegon perot dekel ta'abidi de'atu. Hane mi yemar de'atu. Wait, we only know that Rabbi Yosef says this when it comes to a case, for example, of the fruit of palm trees, which are likely to come. I'm going to sell you next season's harvest of dates from this palm tree. Well, they don't exist now. It's true they don't exist now, but you just have to wait, and automatically, without doing anything, they're just going to grow by themselves. So because it's so sure that it's going to come, it has to do with confidence level, and we're both confident that it's going to happen, and therefore it makes sense that when we make the sale, right, you really have in mind, I'm giving you these dates and you're acquiring them and you pay me for them. So that's a valid sale according to the Rabbi Meir. But how can you apply that to the cistern? Who says that the water is going to come? Who says it's going to rain? Maybe it won't rain. Maybe if it does rain, the rain will go the other way and fill up something else. How do you know that the cistern is going to get full? It's not as sure as the palm tree. Amar Rava, mashkach chada b'mayim haba'in derech aser labor, v'yonim haba'in derech shobacho la shobach. Rabbi explains, no, you can have a case where you can be sure that the cistern will fill up. For example, the water is coming by way of his courtyard into the cistern. In other words, there's a courtyard right near, and it's sloped in such a way that as soon as it rains, this is the first place that it goes, and so you can be sure it's going to rain at some point and the cistern will be full. So yes, it's that sure. And the same thing with the dovecote. Even though dovecote is empty now, it's on the way. It's from another dovecote that is full of doves. And so, those doves, when they leave that dovecote, they're going to have to go through this dovecote, and so surely it's going to fill up. And so that's the case that I was talking about, that we're totally confident that the doves will come in, that the water will come in, and therefore we can apply to be me'ir also in this case. Even though it's not full now, it surely will be full. So whatever comes into it in the future is also hekdesh, and I'm so sure it's going to come in, you commit me'ilah if you use it. We ask, okay, now what's the machloket in the sefa of the baraita when there's currently water in the cistern, right? We understand Tanakh Kama that says that there's currently water in the cistern. Okay, you violate me'ilah. But how could we explain to Rabbi Elazar that the water currently in the cistern, if you use it, you don't commit me'ilah? Amar Rava, כגון שהקדיש בור סתם, ורבי אלעזר ורבי שמעון סבר לה כעבוד. אמר, דנין דין גבוה מדין הדיוט. So Rava says is, for example, when you say, I want to make this cistern hekdesh. I don't specify with its contents, without its contents, I don't say anything else. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, follows his own father's opinion, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who says in general that we can compare the law of heaven to the law of ordinary people. In other words, the law of Hekdesh and the laws of sales between two human beings, we follow the same principles as follows. Madin hejot maseh amar berazabinelach maya lazebinilach. Afdin gaboa bera akdesh maya la akdesh. Just like in a regular case between two people. If I sell you a cistern, and all I say is cistern, so I could say, I sold you the cistern, but not the water in it. We see here, this is actually against the Mishnah, but we're assuming a halacha against the Mishnah. We're going to ask about that in a second. But that's what we're assuming. So just like in a case of a sale, if I sell you the cistern that's full of water now, I only sold you the cistern itself, but I'm going to come and I take the water that's currently in it for myself. So too, Rabbi Shimon says, we compare that with making something hekdesh. That if I make the cistern hekdesh and I don't specify, I only made the cistern itself. That's the clay, the bricks that it's made out of, and not the water. And that's the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, his son. So that makes sense, even though right now it's full. Whereas Tanakh Kama says, no, it's true, I agree with the basic law of two people. If I sell you a cistern, it does not include the water, but selling something to someone else is a different category of law as making something hekdesh. When you're making something hekdesh, then we have to give the benefit of the doubt to the hekdesh, and we assume someone who's giving hekdesh will give generously, and therefore it includes the water as well, and that explains the machloket in the case when it's full. Now we finally ask, Vidin hejot lo vatenan machar bor machar memav. Wait, how can you say that when it comes to an ordinary sale, if I sell you the cistern, it does not come with the water? Our Mishnah says if I sell you a cistern, it does come with the water. Amar Rava, matnitin yechida ahi detanya machar bor lo machar memav. Rabbi Natan omer machar bor machar memav. And Rava finally explains that our Mishnah is actually only a minority opinion, as we see in the following baraita, that Tanakh Kama says, if I sell you a cistern, the water does not come along with it. And that's the law that we were referring to above here when we quoted in the name of Rabbi Shimon. Whereas only Rabbi Natan, minority opinion, says, if I sell you the cistern, I also sell the water. So now we learn that our Mishnah, although in our Mishnah it's anonymous, so we thought that was the opinion of everybody, this is something that the Bavli does in many cases. to de-authorize the opinion of the Mishnah. When we read the Mishnah, we think, oh, that's the majority opinion. Biur Nasi put that in as the majority opinion. And the Bavli comes and says, hold on, if you look back in the source, which is in this Baraita, we see that that's the minority opinion of Rabbi Natan. Not everybody disagreed. In fact, the Tanakama of the Baraita says the opposite. And that's the basis of the ruling of Rabbi Elazar be Rabbi Shimon, who thinks, like his father, that we do compare the laws one to another, and therefore, just like in Din Hejot, if I sell you a cistern, it does not come with the water, so too if I make a cistern Hekdesh, it's full right now, and I make it Hekdesh, it does not come with the water, because I only said cistern. So we now resolve the paradox. If right now there's water in the cistern, I sold you the cistern, I didn't say water. Or I make hekdesh the cistern, I don't mean the water is not included, I keep the water. However, if it's empty, so now I made hekdesh the cistern, just like if I sell you a cistern, it's empty, now in the future, any water that comes in, it's your cistern, so obviously, any future water will be yours. Same thing with hekdesh. Once I make it a hekdesh, and we know it's definitely going to come in, and so it's so sure of it that it's like I'm making the future water itself hekdesh. So any future water that comes in will be hekdesh, and since I know it's going to come in, therefore one violates me'ilah, even though for the water right now in it, no, I never had that in mind, and that never that does not become hekdesh at all, not in the first place, and therefore certainly not liable to me'ilah. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen v'amen.